Funding for Schaefer Illis is provided by
Squarespace, the sponsor of today's video. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that I will review the bad guys if you get my YTP channel Schaeff Classic to 100,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. There hasn't been a lot of activity on that front in a while, so I just wanted to give you guys another friendly reminder. You have 10 months. If you really want it that badly, go subscribe.
The clock is ticking.
Bitch! Okay, now for your regularly scheduled program. So, there's a new Kung Fu Panda movie where Po needs to travel to a new city in order to do battle with a villain there. You know, that reminds me of something. I just can't put my finger on it. Oh yeah, Kung Fu Panda 2! I wanted to get to this back in December, but the sheer overwhelming length of the Spielberg and Mario Kart 8 rankings made me say, yeah, let's do it next year. So now, here we are, Kung Fu Panda 2. A lot of people say this movie is better than the first, and maybe I'm the wrong person to make this video then, because I do not think this one is the best, actually. I prefer the compelling Tai Lung and Shifu plotline, the wise words of Oogway, and the far more insane action. But while this sequel lacks a lot of the original's best attributes, as a consolation, it does deliver what is rather shockingly some of the most emotionally powerful and mature scenes in the entire DreamWorks catalog. Out of the whole trilogy thus far, this is the one where the central conflict of the film is most intertwined with Po himself. And there's a lot of thematic richness to be found in both his story and how it intertwines with that of the villains. There's quite a bit to dive into, so let's get started with... I wanted to kick things off with something I don't usually compliment when it comes to animated features. And to be fair, a lot of other people don't really do that either. But I really think it's worth admiring the direction of this film. I think the directors of the first film, Mark Osborne and John Stevenson, deserve a ton of respect as well, especially for the unrivaled fight scenes they constructed. But while the fight scenes aren't quite on the same level in 2, I think its new director, Jennifer Young Nelson, really stepped up the visual presentation of the series in a lot of ways. The easiest example to point to is this sick as hell traveling montage, which employs great, unique shading techniques and masterful editing to contrast Po and Shen's preparations for their impending showdown. It continues the tradition set by the original of the Kung Fu Panda films being the first 3D DreamWorks movies to really experiment with their visual presentation. I also appreciate the effective use of day and night to signify the level of darkness at each point in the story. Most of the first half takes place at daytime, subconsciously making you feel like this is another goofy Po adventure. Yippee! Then, at the very middle of the movie, where Po and Shen finally meet, the tone shifts and it becomes dark outside. And it remains perpetually nighttime all the way up until the point where Po finally defeats Shen. It's a small, simple touch, but it supports the tone of the story very nicely. Then, of course, there's the excellent editing and presentation of Po's inner peace segment. The skillful ways of transitioning to the 2D segments, and the way similar editing techniques are brought back when he has to balance the cannonballs the same way. It just feels like a movie directed with a vision for how everything should look and feel. It really stuns on a directorial level in a way a lot of DreamWorks films, even really great ones like Shrek or Megamind, kinda don't. It's the script and the performances that make movies like that shine. While Kung Fu Panda 2 just has this scale to it, this intensity. From the sheer magnitude of the collapsing tower our heroes have to escape from, to the overwhelming and consistent use of hellish reds throughout the story. This is just a striking and well-realized visual treat, with so many little touches that make it feel as dark and dramatic as a middle chapter should. Anyway, I think that's a sufficient warm-up in terms of this movie's discussion, so now I think we should turn our attention to its crown jewel, the character that plays a huge part in making it as good as it is. Time to talk about... Lord Shen is an absolutely fantastic villain. I think he's a short step behind Tai Lung overall, but what he lacks in terms of being physically intimidating, he makes up for by being far more evil. Like, the main villain of a silly Jack Black Panda movie is committing genocide. This is just in the first 2 minutes, too. They don't shy away from how horrific it is that he attempts to wipe out the entire panda species. And throughout the film's runtime, we continue to see the traumatic effects this has on Po. The way Shen relishes in his evil actions, taunts Po over the loss of his mother. It's truly insane how much of a personal vendetta he has against this panda who never did anything to him, only being a potential prophesized threat to his evil ambitions. Speaking of prophecy, I love the line in the opening narration that Shen tried to avoid his fate, but what he did next only sealed it. What a perfect echo of the theme of the first movie, that one often meets his destiny on the road one takes to avoid it. It's entirely possible that had he left the pandas alone, Po could have grown up far away from the Valley of Peace and never become a kung fu master, thus never being a factor for Shen at all. But then maybe some other panda would have defeated him, I don't know, they got all the chi, I guess. Hey, I always wonder why a warrior of black and white had to be a panda. What about a zebra? Or a skunk? Or a penguin? I guess they didn't have any of those animals in Chinatown, so never mind, moot point. There's a lot of elements surrounding Shen that really up his intimidation factor. Like how there are so many scenes in this movie that are just drenched in red. It surrounds him in the opening scenes, it's prominent within the walls of the palace he takes for himself, it's the color of his fireworks of doom, and it's all over the later action scenes that feature him. Whenever he turns up, the color red follows, almost as if the blood he soaked in will never escape him. This simple yet consistent color choice perfectly suits the intensity of the character and the story. But his menacing presence comes from far more than just excellent art direction. Gary Oldman's distinct, sinister voice is unforgettable for one. And there's also the great way they make use of his design for the few fight scenes he has. They knew exactly how to translate a peacock of all things into a competent fighter, making him shoot feathers out and use them as a distraction. But mainly, his greatest intimidation factor is the fact that he's above kung fu battles. He has an army of wolves at his disposal, and a whole lot of murder cannons, the likes of which no one in this universe has ever seen. Tai Lung, scary as he was just one guy. Lord Shen is the disgraced heir to an empire. And man does it feel like it, the way the odds are in his favor in this film. He makes seasoned kung fu masters so fearful of him that they decide to stay put in jail instead of challenging him. He captures the Furious Five, and even when it seems like they regain the upper hand, he escapes and nearly wipes them out. Perhaps most intense of all is when he shoots Po point blank with his cannon and brings him stunningly close to death. This is how you establish a credible villainous threat, crafting this seemingly unstoppable monster who always has something up his sleeve. I think another element of Shen that makes him so terrifying compared to the rest of the villainous roster in this series is the fact that his evil power is the most rooted in reality. I know, what a silly thing to compliment a Kung Fu Panda movie for. But ultimately, his ability to conquer anyone and anywhere through the invention of gunpowder is a very tangible threat that actually ties into Chinese history. China is where gunpowder originates from, and it significantly changed warfare, which is somewhat echoed in this film, where Shen's new weapon is described as something that could put an end to Kung Fu. Ultimately, it's more grounded and realistic than the supernatural abilities of Kai and the Chameleon. And while Tai Lung is a mostly grounded grappler, he does have some supernatural feeling nerve attacks. Plus, let's be real, I don't even think the most seasoned Kung Fu master in real life could pull off this prison escape. Shen, despite being a talking peacock, presents the most real and tangible threat across this series. And the writing, the direction, and the severity of his actions all support this. But on top of how evil he is, I think Shen's character is especially rounded out by a couple of other traits, one of which is his immaturity. He's very much a spoiled brat who believes himself entitled to his parents' city and all of China. And you can see this prissy attitude come through with his meticulous demands of his subordinates, as well as how often the soothsayer gets his goat. I like that. It suits his disgraced prince identity very well and further distinguishes him from Tai Lung. I used to have a problem with the jokes the soothsayer makes at his expense, but I actually really like that now because it represents how fate will always get the better of him, no matter how hard he tries. In general, I think Shen's relationship with the soothsayer is perhaps the most compelling one in the entire film, because it ties into another major facet that makes his character so interesting, that being his moments of doubt, of empathy. Nothing with him hits quite as hard emotionally as that flicker of regret in Tai Lung's eyes following his battle with Shifu. But ever since I was a kid, I could not stop thinking about this one scene. After destroying his ancestral home to get Po and the Five on the run, Shen is told by the soothsayer to stop so his parents can rest in peace. Shen expresses his frustration with his parents wronging him and asserts that they hated him. But the soothsayer tells him that they loved him, and sending him away is what killed them. And Shen, rather notably, has no rebuttal to that. It's as if he's admitting to himself that all these years, he was deluding himself into thinking that they hated him. But he knew the truth deep down. And yet, he also knows that it's too late for him to heed what they would have wanted. He simply says, "The dead exist in the past, and I must tend to the future." His parents and the love and concern they had for him no longer matters. And by extension, neither do the pandas he's slaughtered. As long as he fixates on seizing his future, he no longer has to concern himself with the past in any way. And that includes no longer needing to obsess over the soothsayer's prediction. I guess that means he can finally kill her.
Set the soothsayer free.
What? For a villain who did some pretty shockingly evil things, this is perhaps his most shocking action in the entire film. I could not stop thinking about it when I was younger. He let the soothsayer go, an action which, mind you, directly leads to his downfall since the soothsayer was able to heal Poe after the cannon blast. It would be so easy for such a gleefully murderous guy to just kill her, but the fact that he didn't is so fascinating. I feel as if this is his internal compromise, the last time he will ever accept what his parents wanted him to be. He shows mercy not out of his own self-interest, but as one final peace offering to the people who raised and loved him. You can actually see him gulp right before he utters the words, indicating his hidden nervousness and reluctance to allow his link to the future to simply walk away. But he goes through with it, internally assuring himself that nothing will stand in his way, regardless of whether or not one old goat goes free. But just like before, Shen's actions are ultimately what seals his fate. Just an incredibly fascinating and very unexpectedly nuanced villain. Again, I cannot stress enough, it is insane how hard the Kung Fu Panda movies try. So, now that I've discussed just about everything I wanted to when it comes to the villain in the movie, why don't we turn our attention to the hero? Actually, before we get to that, why don't I just play you my favorite Shen scene from the movie? Alright, soothsayer, if you're so smart, why don't you tell me what the best way to build a website is? Shen, computers haven't been invented yet. How do you even know what a website is? I don't know, it doesn't matter, just do as I say. Okay. According to my future vision, the best way to build a website is with Squarespace. Perfect. Then I will have this Squarespace. Actually, can you elaborate more? I don't know what that is. Yeah, I bet you don't, you fucking idiot. Hey, what the? Squarespace is an amazing online website builder that enables you to create beautiful websites for your business or personal hobby. Create your own online store to sell your products. Whether they be physical, digital, or service products, you better believe Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online. Hop on in with one of their professional website templates, with designs for every category and use case. Then make it your own by customizing the design, updating content, and adding whichever features you need. Any Squarespace template can do anything you want, allowing your idea, brand, or business to stand out. And on any device, too. You can even host video content using Squarespace, organizing your video library, showing off your content on beautiful video pages, and selling access to exclusive videos with member areas. The possibilities are near limitless. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ShapeRellis to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Out of all the movies, Kung Fu Panda 2 presents Poe with the most compelling and complete arc. I mean, I love his story in the first movie, and it really is cool how he becomes a kung fu master by the end of it. But the sheer personal stake he has in this film, the shocking emotional weight of his journey to accept and grow past his trauma, is simply beautiful. He starts the movie out as jovial as ever, content with his place among the Furious Five and having a great time upholding justice and fighting these metal bandits. Just as an aside, I wanted to mention how good this opening fight scene is. It makes really creative use of musical instruments, the Furious Five's abilities, and the need to keep this bunny safe with various kung fu moves. It's all fun and games. Until Poe sees this mysterious symbol from his past, temporarily paralyzing him as he gets visions of what seems to be his mother. Clearly thrown by this, he needs to leave right away and go see the best character in the series. Woo! Mr. Ping! I feel like if I would ever make a top 100 favorite characters ranking video, Mr. Ping would be somewhere on that list. He is simply peak. From here, we see Po rather humorously realize for the first time that he was adopted by the goose. It's a funny expression of Po's naivete, but it's also very sweet hearing Mr. Ping recount how he found Po as a baby and raised him. Such a genuine and heartfelt story from this adoptive dad. And yet, it doesn't satisfy Po, who just wants to learn what happens before that. He then gets his mission and prepares to head out, even as Mr. Ping begs him to stay. Po tells him that it's his job to save Kung Fu, and if he doesn't, then what is he? And Mr. Ping says, "You're my son, right?" And Po doesn't give him an answer. Bro, do not disrespect Mr. Ping, come on! I imagine this is a reflection of a lot of adopted kids' mindsets. You appreciate your adoptive parent for raising you, but on some level, you don't see yourself as their kid, and you become fixated on the idea that you need to find your actual birth parents. I feel like most kids grow out of this mindset eventually because adoptive parents are every bit as valid as birth parents. But Po still has a whole movie to go through before he can realize that. Right now, he is haunted by the image of his mother, and it's the main thing standing in his way from achieving inner peace. Early on, Shifu, who basically has no role in this story, or the third one, or the fourth one, it seems like from the trailer. I feel like they should have killed him off in the first movie, actually. His arc ended in that film, and now he's just kind of vibing. But whatever, Shifu tells Po he needs to achieve inner peace, which Po just can't seem to do, especially with this whole parent thing on his mind. He gets beaten up by a radish in his 2D dreams, and eventually he vents to Tigress about it. I really like the friendship the two of them form, and I especially am so glad that it never becomes a romance across all of these movies. This is the only DreamWorks franchise with no central couple. Aside from The Boss Baby, I think. I ain't watching that shit, I don't know. But it is so nice that we don't have to force any romance whatsoever, and these movies can be about more interesting things. But through this conversation, we get to see a more empathetic side of Tigress. A big surprise given how much she actively hated Po in the first movie. And I really like how later, after interrogating Po about why he always freezes up during these fights, he explains that Shen knows what happened to his parents, and she immediately softens and hugs him, shocking everyone. She insists Po stays behind out of empathy, and it's just a nice arc for her that makes perfect sense based on everything we've seen. But Po is the focus of our analysis, so let's back all the way up. The middle portion of the movie where they get to Gongmen City is some wacky fun. They fight a bunch of wolves, they become Pac-Man, they tell these seasoned Kung Fu masters to fight back even though they've just completely 100% given up. I mean, surely the presence of 6 other Kung Fu masters would convince them to stand up to Shen and his cannon. Like, they don't actually know Shen has more than one cannon at this point. As far as they know, it's just the one. So I'm pretty sure the 8 of them could devise a plan to destroy it before he turns it on the city. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that these two are kind of stupid. Oh well, I guess they're just really stubborn and they'll never join the good guys again. Oh, never mind, Master Shifu convinced them off screen to fight back in the final battle. Sure. Also, Monkey is kind of an idiot. I don't know, I think the middle 10-minute chunk of this movie is kind of whatever. It's decent, but it doesn't really have any interesting character moments or exceptional action. And there's no portion of the first movie where I kind of check out like this. It's not really that long of a stretch though, and the film picks up considerably when we see Po and Shen meet. As I mentioned earlier, this is pretty much the exact midpoint of the film, where the tone shifts. We had some goofy fun so far, but from here on out, the movie lacks anything similar to the silly Dragon Pac-Man stuff, as the threat becomes considerably more serious. Shen has his fun with Po and his apparent lack of knowledge of what Shen has done. Then after taking down the definitely one and only cannon Shen has, Po is once again taken aback by that piercing red eye symbol, which gives him another vision of his mother, this time with Shen being there. This distraction allows Shen to escape and bombard his ancestral home with cannon fire, leading to a harrowing escape that Po and the 5 barely pull off. All because of Po's lingering trauma freezing him in place for the second time in this film. After being told to stay behind for his own good, he doesn't and risks his own life to confront Shen in order to learn the truth. This is set in perhaps the most hellish location of all so far. Shen's metal factory with lava pits and blaring reds everywhere. Now, I'll be totally fair and mention when the mostly fun Jack Black quips in these movies kinda screw with the dark tone.
Looking for me? I said that too soon, didn't I?
Whoa, that just happened. But everything soon comes together when Shen claims Poe's parents didn't love him, only to shoot him at point blank range with his cannon. Shifu even senses this moment through the Force. That's how you know it's serious. And now, we finally come to the most powerful scene of this movie. And the entire trilogy, honestly. It's just absurd how dramatic and mature it is. Poe is rescued by the soothsayer and told to confront the recurring nightmare that he keeps having about his mother. In striking and distinct 2D animation, we see him witness his green and thriving childhood village. This actually sets up the third film very well, as green is its primary color, seen through not only Kai, but the vivid greens of the new panda village he finds, and reconnects with his past at. But of course, his past also consists of darkness and blood. Shen overtakes the memory and bathes it in red, all as a truly tremendous dramatic score plays. And ultimately, the soothsayer tells Poe to stop fighting his memory and let it flow, essentially saying that in order to heal from his trauma, he must process it first. The only way to overcome and grow from his dark past is to acknowledge it, not fight back the memories of it. He must come to terms with his unhappy beginnings, and he does so in a beautiful sequence that fuses 2D and 3D animation with clever editing, simultaneously elegant and intense music, and the portrayal of Poe's final moments he ever had with his mother. Simply incredible, leaving both Poe and presumably the audience on the verge of tears. But the soothsayer echoes what Mr. Ping told him earlier, that it's okay if his story doesn't have a happy beginning because of who he chooses to be in the rest of his story. This is, of course, the central message of the film, that our trauma does not define us, that we can go on to live incredible lives and do incredible things, even if we greatly suffered in the past. And now that Poe has accepted what happened to him and achieved inner peace, it's time for the final battle with the guy that just can't get over his past. There isn't a whole lot to say about the climax at first. It's just a pretty fun and exciting battle against Shen's fleet. But once they make it to the harbor, this is where the awesomeness really comes in. Poe stands alone in front of Shen's cannon, and since he was able to achieve inner peace, perfectly balancing a raindrop with his hands, he now does the same thing, but with a cannonball. Oh my god, that's the coolest shit ever! It's such a well built up moment within the narrative, and it culminates with Poe holding onto a cannonball, briefly becoming the yin and yang symbol, and then performing the no-use skadoosh attack, throwing the ball right back at Shen and destroying his weapon. In their final conversation, Shen asks how Poe could possibly find peace after he scarred him for life. And Poe echoes the mindset he just adopted, telling him that it's okay to let go of the past and choose to be something else now. Shen, of course, doesn't give this a second thought and chooses to attack Poe. But ultimately, Shen's stubborn fixation on the past is what led him on this path to destruction. He obsessed over his parents wronging him and dedicated years of his life to getting revenge. He couldn't grow, he couldn't move past it, and perhaps most damning of all, whatever trauma he accrued from getting disowned and banished was his own damn fault. Like, he tried to wipe out the entire panda species, and he never once considered that he was the one in the wrong. Meanwhile, Poe not only overcame his trauma, but he had every reason to resent Shen for what he did. And yet, that never comes up once because Poe is just that sweet and genuine. The idea that he should hate Shen doesn't cross his mind. Poe has a lot of character flaws that frequently hold him back, but one of his greatest attributes is his unyielding compassion. He offers it to Shen, who responds by affirming that he can never change. And ultimately, he meets his end from a falling mast in this final battle. The day is saved, everyone congratulates Poe, and finally, he returns home to Mr. Ping with a bunch of radishes because he was found in the radish cart. Oh, that's so sweet. And now we get the conclusion to Poe's character arc. The sweetest moment in the entire trilogy. And as powerful as the inner peace scene is, this is the moment that consistently makes me cry the most. I would play it for you, but DreamWorks hates me and will not let you watch this video if I do, so I'll just tell you what happens. Poe tells Mr. Ping, "I found out who I am. I'm your son." Bro, that's so good! That's a perfect conclusion to this arc. I love it so dearly, and the movie itself wraps up, of course, with the reveal that Poe's birth dad is alive? What? I love this ending so dearly. It's a perfect hook for the third one, while also feeling conclusive in its own right. While I don't personally love Kung Fu Panda 2 as much as its predecessor, it is ultimately a highly worthy sequel that goes to deeper and darker places than the previous film. Parts of it are a little uneven, and I'm not going to say for the billionth time in this video that the action was better in the first movie. Instead, I'll say that the first one was kind of funnier. But with that said, the highs of Kung Fu Panda 2 are the highs of the entire series. This movie has a lot of the best individual moments and scenes in any of these films. I think it's a fantastic continuation. I love it so much. You should absolutely check it out if you haven't already. And yeah, looks like that fourth installment is basically already here. I'll soon be talking about it in its own video. But I just wanted to end things off here by saying that I kinda think the series peaked in terms of its tones and themes with the first two installments. From the pre-release promotional materials, 4 kinda looks like another 3 in terms of being not bad, but not as surprisingly compellingly dramatic and dark as the first two installments. Kung Fu Panda 3 is tonally the kind of movie you expect from the title Kung Fu Panda. It doesn't surprise you the way 1 and 2 did. I'm expecting to not be surprised with this fourth installment, but you never know, it could. And even if it doesn't, I hope it's a good time regardless. We'll see. Good night, Valley of Peace.